In my review of The Gorge earlier this year, I went through the filmography of Scott Derrickson, who at this stage of his directing career could be classified as a legitimate genre filmmaker who has solidified his reputation in Hollywood. His movies had garnered critical acclaim and financial success, allowing him to make movies of his own accord and passion, quite a step up from the days when he was being employed to rework screenplays which was ultimately not being produced. The screenplay's tweaking jobs gave him sustenance but crushed his soul until his big break in The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Written by Derrickson and his usual writing partner, Paul Harris Bodman, the movie's release in 2005 was loosely based on the tragic travails of Anneliese Michel, the German girl who died of malnutrition in 1976 after undergoing 67 Catholic exorcism rites. I was wholly not informed that this was a dramatic court trial about a Catholic priest, Father Moore, who was being charged for being negligent in leading to the death of young Emily Rose, a 19-year-old college student who, from her ailments physically and mentally, was deemed as demonic possession by her parents, leading to rendering help from Father Moore and his parish. The tempestuous trial was anchored by highly regarded lawyer Erin Brunner, who was agnostic and was assigned by the Archdiocese for the case, which if she had won, she would be made partner of her law firm. The entirety of the movie would be juxtaposed between the trial procession, from which Father Moore's case was not looking good, with all evidence stacking against him, and the recollection of when Emily was first attacked by the unseen forces, her dreary stages of possession decimating her physically, as well as Moore and his cohort attempting to go through the exorcism rites, which proved to be an stifling ordeal. With regards to the whole possession segments of the movie, it was hard not to sympathize with the trials and tribulations poor Emily was being put through. There had been many well-known and equally well-made movies about demonic possessions, but there were few that gave the audience the insight of how it began and how psychologically damaging it can inflict on the victims. I would say the initial attack was one of the scariest demonic attacks represented on the big screen, with the infuse of visual jump scares. You could see the toll Emily possession had put on her family, who refused to give up on her. Neither was Father Moore, despite the fact very early on he knew he was not up to the task but still soldiered on. Like The Ritual from David Middle I had reviewed earlier, the balance between medical and religious interventions were lines often blurred. While Father Moore had been adjudged for not giving timely and accurate advice about medical assistance, resulting in the ultimate demise of Emily, there was a medical doctor all along in the arduous exorcism process. As for the courtroom segments, it was not difficult to be bothered by the antics of the opposing counsel, and he was shrewd in brushing off all the evidence Brunner and her defendant team had gathered, as he was comfortable that the ball was in his team's court, and the jury was unlikely to change their final verdict. The Exorcism of Emily Rose felt like a solid courtroom drama from the 1990s or earlier, interspersed with creepy ongoings that made it an equally memorable demonic possession feature. It hit all the tropes of a possession and exorcism film, yet linking every facet to a key part of the trial. It gave the audience a chance to ponder about the validity of the various accounts and whether Emily's conditions was worsened because of the poorly performed exorcism process. The wonderful screenplay from Derrickson and Bodman was well acted by the talented cast, and Derrickson was already displaying his ability to tell a gripping horror story, with the gritty courtroom drama an added bonus. Laura Linney was outstanding as Erin Brunner. From building a rapport with Father Moore, she was adamant in the stance that he was not responsible for the death of Emily. The weird experiences she had slowly changed her mind with regards to Emily's experience and felt that supernatural forces were at work. There was one scene with her beaten to submission when the key witness could not make it, and she had been chastised for her method. She was welling up, yet is adamant not to concede defeat. The late British actor Tom Wilkinson played Father Moore, and I thought his performance was subtle yet unrelenting during the trial. It felt like Father Moore was ready for any verdict to be passed down, with his sole regret not being able to help Emily to resolve her possession. Jennifer Carpenter gave me the creeps at times in the TV show Dexter. As Deborah Morgan, she had a love-hate relationship with Dexter and had been a stumbling block to our serial killer, which actually means she was the good guy in the story. Well, not exactly if you have been tolerating Deborah throughout the series. Carpenter was encouraged by co-star Laura Linney to vie for the role of the titular Emily Rose. Once again, I had to emphasize the performance of the victim of the demonic possession is highly critical for these movies, for audience to be traumatized and sympathized with. Jennifer Carpenter had a range of vile expressions, again from her tourney in Dexter. Therefore, it was seamless for her to showcase poor Emily under possession, taunting and hissing at Father Moore and the others. She then flipped to the sympathy part, and I was surprised that Jennifer Carpenter's tormented performance actually affected me from the initial attack sequence to finally when she was resigned to fate, and how she thought the fatal possession was a mean to spread the words of faith to people who had theirs shaken. The ethereal scene by the tree was such an impactful one, and through the narration of Wilkinson's Moore, it was a memorable scene in the movie. The Exorcism of Emily Rose was not your typical demonic possession movie, although it hit the usual tropes. The trial of the scrutinized priest would allow audience to draw their own skepticism with the rituals, has only been bought over by the plot and solid performances from Linney, Wilkinson, and Carpenter. This was a fantastic movie, and I could see how it propelled Scott Derrickson into the spotlight and justified its financial success. I'm awarding the movie an 8 out of 10. Sinister from 2012 was the movie that made people, including myself, to sit up and take notice of Scott Derrickson. Co-written by C. Robert Cargill, a seasoned entertainment website journalist and writer, and would replace Paul Harris Bowman as Derrickson's writing partner. Sinister was produced by Blumhouse Productions, and it certainly felt like your archetypal Blumhouse movie. Ethan Hawke played Ellison Oswald, a true crime novel author who was seeking his next successful book, giving him and his family the financial assurance and helped with his hubris, proving his detractors wrong that he was no one-hit wonder. Oswald relocated his family consisting of his wife and 2 young children to a new abode, keeping his missus in the dark that this was a house that saw a gruesome death of the entire family who resided there previously. They were settling down in the new house and the neighborhood. The children started to get affected by things like night terrors and seeing apparitions, while Ellison would discover a box of home videos in the attic. The videos would entail recordings of 5 families which spread out several decades before all ended in a morbid documentation. The video slowly affected Ellison mentally, and he would uncover some strange visuals despite the coarse quality of these film strips. Deciphering creepy visuals and logos, Ellison would seek help from occult specialists who uncovered an ancient thread that would spell ominous premonitions for our protagonist and his family, especially when he started connecting the dots with the pattern with what had transpired in the home videos, which were a strategic exposition too. The movie felt like a cross between The Conjuring and the old-school Amityville horror with James Brolin, as well as Tobe Hooper's Poltergeist. It certainly felt like since the success of Paranormal Activity, Blumhouse had a penchant for such domestic horror which audience would eat up with the tropes of perils posed for the fledglings and how these dangers in an unfamiliar environment could pose as a trigger for heated arguments between the adults. Something natural inside me wanted to say Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy had a natural chemistry to tear down each other with words. Before realizing that this was no Blumhouse version of the Before series, it was English actress Juliet Rylance who would match up nicely against Hawke as a concerned mother and helpless spouse, especially when she knew what was up with the new place. The children would play their parts. The night terrors the son suffered as a medical condition was scary enough, but the plot was always going to surround the daughter, especially the memorable poster of her wiping blood-like paint on the wall. I liked the presence of side characters like the stoic sheriff, who knew the history of the house, but was unaware of the supernatural elements behind it. Meanwhile, his deputy was starstruck with the famous novelist, leading to some levity through the interactions, but he came in useful in the end. I thought Derrickson paced the plot very well, allowing audience to follow along with our lead character to peel off the layers of mystery of the serial deaths and the supernatural threat linked to it. Jump scares were utilized sparingly, but the impact it made when landed, resulting in the flurry of goosebumps, was noteworthy. The mystery behind the home videos made the plot gripping, and the skin-crawling horror part was the cherry on the top. The demonic entity known as Butthole is manipulative in taking over a child's psyche, helped with registering it as one of the iconic horror characters in recent years. Bakhu will choose a prime time to come into your face, and that was an effective jump scare. I will try to find time to watch the sequel to Sinister with Derrickson and Cargill doing the story, but the original movie was a solid scare affair with a captivating mystery as a plot, and showcased Ethan Hawke's dramatic performance was suitable for the horror genre, in which he will continue to make movies like The Purge, as well as reuniting with Derrickson in The Black Phone in 2021. Sinister is awarded a 7.5 out of 10. 2 years after Sinister, Scott Derrickson and Paul Harris Bodman will come together again and adapt the book Beware the Night, based on the real-life accounts of a retired New York policeman, Ralph Sachi, where he was dealing with some evil on the street that ammunition could not resolve. The movie, titled Deliver Us from Evil, starred Aussie leading man Eric Bana in the role of Sachi. Sachi will be dealing with a string of strange events that, on surface, look like your typical domestic crimes like physical abuse to spouse and children. However, when the perpetrators were behaving in what the laymen will refer as possessed, the police began to tread carefully. Sachi befriended a Spanish priest, Mendoza, played by Venezuelan actor Edgar Ramirez, through a strangely linked case which stemmed from a serious case of demonic possession that spread from individual to individual and was starting to affect Sachi and his daughter. When Sachi was being diagnosed to be sensitive to the hauntings from the demonic creature, he and his team, with the assistance of Mendoza, would go on a wild goose chase of the originator of this string of ghastly events, and showed how the tour of duty from some war veterans had brought the worst things to them more than just PTSD. I love Deliver Us from Evil. Why? Simply because Derrickson unabashedly paid homage to David Fincher's Seven from the start to the end. From the gritty police procedurals to the antagonist's penchant in creating havoc in our protagonist's familiar life, to even the opening credits, it felt like close to 2 decades on, the charm of Seven was still influencing other movies. Eric Bana is great in playing a no-nonsense tough guy, and this was especially integral in the role of Ralph Sachi. The character devoted too much into his job and was haunted by a case from the past, and was beginning to see fractures back at home as both his wife and daughter, who had been used to not seeing him much at home, but when the demon started scaring the young girl, Sachi's absence was even more pronounced. Olivia Munn was competent in the role of Sachi's wife, perhaps her best performance for me. A strange casting choice was Joan McHale as Sachi's partner butler. McHale, who was at this time period would be well known as the irritating skirt chaser in Dan Harmon's sitcom Community, played Butler, a NYPD officer who seems to try hard to impress his cohort, yet was a trustworthy ally for Sachi and completely void of any smarminess. It was certainly weird to see McHale without a snarky quip. Wait, I think there was some subtle one at the start. Bana and Ramirez developed a strong rapport in the roles of Sachi and Mendoza, once again built upon the bond we saw in movies like Seven, and of course other classic buddy cop movies. Every scene the pair would spend unraveling strange happenings and slowly peeling off each other's inhibitions to reveal a dark past or something I dug into. Of course, they had to be the ones to deal with the chaos in the climactic end, which was a bit flaccid on how things had resolved. Speaking of the climactic end, English actor Sean Harris, who played the key antagonist, was no Kevin Spacey from Seven, but he stood toe-to-toe opposite Bana and Ramirez in his performance. While there were some competent jump scares, and Derrickson was proficient in building the dreary mood of the surrounding, the movie was still very much dependent on the performances of the actors and their interactions. I believe the general consensus was that Deliver Us from Evil was a lesser movie as compared to Emily Rose or Sinister, which in terms of storytelling and filmmaking, I am on board with. Yet, I have fleshed out the things that hooked me in this movie, therefore I am awarding the movie a 7.5 out of 10. Hope you guys have enjoyed this retrospective look at a director's work. The last I did was on David Cronenberg's body horror features, and I was watching these movies for the first time with a fresh perspective. If you want to give me a kudos, please click the like button and share this video if you can. Subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for other retrospective reviews whenever I have the initiative to do another one. Aussie director Sean Burnt might not have an extensive film library for me to do a retrospective review, but Dangerous Animals was no less an enjoyable watch, so check out the review I have done for the movie. It was a thrill to see Derrickson putting Hollywood A-listers, all your usual dramatic actors, in horror movies, comparatively Anna Taylor-Joy and Miles Teller was a disappointment in the Gorge.